Today's target will be factoring trinomials. This is part 2 of the two-part series on factoring. In part 1, we talked about setting up the area model and pulling out GCFs to find the factors of a polynomial. Today we're going to look at trinomials. We'll look at how we set up the boxes, from how we start from scratch, look at all of our different steps, setting up the boxes, and then eventually coming up with the 2 factors or 3 factors for our polynomials. We're going to go through a couple examples. Feel free to pause or rewind as necessary. We're going to go through a few steps here, so make sure you have plenty of space. Make sure you follow along. Step 1, every time you factor a trinomial, is you look for a GCF. So in other words, I look at my trinomial. I've got 3 terms. What can I divide each of those terms by? Well, I can divide them all by 2. So I have, in this case, a GCF of 2. So I would divide everything by 2, and my new trinomial is 2x squared plus 13x plus 15. This GCF is my first factor. So at the very end, when I write my answer, I can't forget about that GCF. So that's got to be step 1. Okay? Now, once we've done that, our goal is to use our area models. Remember the boxes we used last time. And we learned that the x squared term goes in the top left, and the term without a variable goes in the bottom right. Now the issue, though, is that we have 2 empty boxes for only 1 term. So we've got to figure out, how do we split this term up? And the way we do that is you start by multiplying the first and the last together. What do I mean by first and last? First is that number, last is that number. So I would do 2 times 15 to get 30. And now I need 2 numbers that are factors of 30. And add to 13, which you'll recall was that middle term. Okay? So let's list out the factors of 30. 1 times 30, 2 times 15, 3 times 10, and 5 times 6 are all factors of 30. I need a pair that when I add them together, I get 13. Well, 1 plus 30 does not equal 13, nor does 2 plus 15, but 3 and 10 works. Okay? So 3 times 10 gives you 30. 3 plus 10 gives you 13. So once again, you need 2 numbers that multiply to give you the number you found here, and also add to give you that middle term. So now I go back over to my area model. I put a 3x in one corner and a 10x in the other. Where you put those 2 doesn't matter. Those 2 could be switched. So you could put the 10x in the top right and the 3x in the bottom left. The location of those 2 does not matter. That's the big step for this video. Once you've set up the area model, we've already talked about how to solve that, how to pull out the GCFs and find the factors. But how we get here is the biggest step from this video. So if you don't understand what we did to get here, you need to pause the video, rewind it, and watch those steps again. Okay? If you still don't understand it, make a note, and I can hopefully explain it a little bit better when you come into class. Now that we're here, move my model over a little bit so I have some room. We're going to do the steps we learned in the last video. So I look at each row, and I say, okay, what's my common factor? The only thing in common there is an x. 2 and 3 are not divisible by anything, except for 1. Second row, 10 and 15 are both divisible by 5. So I have x plus 5 as my first factor. Then I look at my columns. 2x squared and 10x, well, they're both divisible by 2, and they share an x. Second row, 3x and 15, both divisible by 3. So my second factor is 2x plus 3. Okay? So let's wrap this up. I found 2 factors using my area model. I can't forget about my original factor, that GCF of 2. So when I write my final answer, I have the 2, which is my GCF. I have the x plus 5, which I found from the area model, and the 2x plus 3, which also came from the area model. This is the factored form of what we started with. There's our starting polynomial. All through these steps, we ended up with the factored form. Okay? Once again, if there's anything there that you didn't understand, or maybe I lost you in a certain step, rewind it, watch the process again. And as always, if you still have questions, make a note of it, and we can talk about it in class. Okay? Let's look at another one. Here we have 3x squared plus 6x minus 72. Remember that step 1 is look for a GCF. So in this case, all these numbers are divisible by 3. So it leaves me with x squared plus 2x minus 24. And I'm going to make sure I remember, that's an ugly looking 3. That looks better, a little bit. Make sure I remember to put that GCF of 3 at the end when I write my final answer. Okay, step 2 is to fill out the area model. So you remember we do that. Start with the x squared term. In this case was just x squared. And then we put the negative 24 down here. And now we need 2 numbers that add to 2x. When we find those 2 numbers, as we multiply first and last, last being the negative 24, first being the 1 that's in front of that x squared. So 1 times negative 24 is simply negative 24. And now we need to list the factors of negative 24. Now this can be a little bit tricky because it is a negative number. So when we list out the factors, we could do 1 times negative 24, or I could do negative 1 times positive 24. Both of those would get me to a negative 24. So going through this process, we'd also have 2 and negative 12, or negative 2 and positive 12. We could have 3 and negative 8, or we could have negative 3 and positive 8, or we could have 4 and negative 6, or negative 4 and positive 6. So you actually have 8 different combinations here. Which of these adds to give us positive 2? Well, we cross off these guys. Those don't. Those don't. Those don't. So I'm left with 4 and 6. 4 plus negative 6 gives me negative 2. Well, that doesn't work. I need a positive 2. So negative 4 plus 6 gives me 2. That's what I want to use. So I'm going to go over here, put a negative 4x in one corner. I'm going to put a 6x in the other. And now that I've filled out my area model, I can go ahead and find the factors. So again, I'll move it over a little bit, give myself some room. Okay, from the first row, x squared and negative 4x, all they share is an x. Second row, 6x and negative 24, both divisible by 6. So x plus 6, there's one factor. Let's look at my columns. X squared and 6x, all they share is an x. Negative 4 and negative 24 are both divisible by 4. Remember that negative has to come out. And so my other factor is x minus 4. So putting this all together, I have 3 total factors. Whoops, extended the page a little bit too much there. So remember, I had the 3 from the very beginning. I had the x plus 6, and I had the x plus 4 that I got from my area model. There's the complete factorization of what we started with. 3x squared plus 6x minus 72 factors as that. Okay? So there you see 2 examples work start to finish. It is now your turn. So here is a factor. Make sure you check for a GCF first, and then do your steps to fill out the area model. Pause the video now. Here's your solution worked out start to finish. Make sure you start with the GCF of 5. Dividing everything by 5 leaves you with 2x squared plus 9x plus 4. Check and make sure you did that correctly. If you didn't do that correctly, the rest of the problem is going to be wrong. If you did that correctly, now we can put a 2x squared in the upper left corner of our box and a 4 in the bottom right corner. And then we do first times the last, 2 times 4 to get 8. Our factors of 8 would be 1 and 8, or 2 and 4. 1 and 8 adds together to give us 9, so we're going to put a 1x in one corner and an 8x in the other open corner. And taking out the common factors gives us an x and a 4 down the left, and a 2x and a 1 across the top. So putting everything together gives us 5, x plus 4, 2x plus 1 as the 3 factors of our original polynomial. As always, if you have questions, please make sure you write them down so you bring them into class, and we can make sure everybody is on the right track.